I have the pleasure of kicking this off with the first discussion and of introducing for our first session of the day, General Randy A. George, the 41st Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army. General George needs little introduction. His experience is built atop decades of command and combat experience, and it comes at a pivotal time. Under his directive, the Army is undergoing its most significant transformation in 40 years, modernizing everything from weapons systems to data infrastructure to acquisition processes. Govini is very proud to work with the United States Army and General George on these efforts. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming General George to the stage.
Thanks, Tara. Appreciate it. It's been great.
Welcome again.
Thanks, Tara. Great to be here.
I kept your introduction very short,
Yeah,
and that
I appreciate it. Thank you.
That means I get to embarrass you now. Just by mentioning that truly you are one of the most remarkable leaders I've had the pleasure of working with in 2 decades in national security. So I very much am looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you.
Great.
After your intro, I was going to ask, telling you we have job openings in the Army. So if you're interested in any of those.
For public affairs? I'll let Colonel Butler know. Great. Well, you know, in your introduction, General, we referenced the significant transformation focus for the Army.
Yeah.
And to the point about your leadership, this is something that you have been focused on since day one. It's been exciting to see. I'm wondering if you can help us understand why is the transformation so needed? And as you think about essential areas for Army modernization, where are your priorities and how is progress coming?
Yeah. So I think you did a good job right up front of just laying out the dangerous world that we're living in. And you know, everybody in this room understands how fast technology is moving. And I think the real problem that we all know is that our processes haven't changed. I mean, the processes are our real problem. How we're doing business, you covered a couple of those. I think that's our real challenge. And we have seen that in the Army over the last, since I've been the chief. We are using transforming in contact. It basically started when we knew we had a counter UAS problem in the Middle East. And rather than, waiting to go through all the normal processes that we would do, we would send stuff immediately over there. We would send prototypes over there. We would have users, our soldiers on the ground with developers, people that really could understand the problem and could rapidly act. And we could do this much more quickly rather than it taking 2 years, 3 years, so on and so forth. And so we've taken the same approach with our brigade combat teams with transforming in contact, and we have seen, and the real advantage when you infuse them with technology, you change the network, and I think you were mentioning what we're doing with next generation C2. You will see how much more lethal they are on the battlefield, how much more mobile, low signature, all the things that we know we're going to need to be that's out there. So we're very focused on uncrewed systems. I think that's the way of the future with uncrewed systems, and what we have seen is that they are getting better, cheaper, and more capable just by doing this. Our 3rd Brigade that I just saw in Germany had completely different systems. Same thing for counter UAS, and we're getting ready to do a big demonstration and test with that, both at Irwin and then again over in Germany, and then electronic warfare. But I fully believe, again, this is process change, that we can bring big systems as well with digital engineering and all the things that we're doing to the battlefield much quicker, and we have to do that.
You mentioned the timeline there in terms of 2, 3, 4 years, and that's just one part of the acquisition process. As we move from a warfighting posture of thinking about the use of maybe not relatively few, but certainly very precious, very exquisite military capabilities to a posture of really embracing these uncrewed systems, perhaps at much greater volumes and with mass, and perhaps they're attritable, and that gives the services in the Army flexibility, but it also creates a volume challenge. So if it takes years to get military capability from cradle to grave through the defense acquisition process, will it get worse if we all of a sudden need to dramatically increase the volume of systems that we are creating? And how do you think about acquisition as part of this process?
I think what you're talking about is scale. And that's what we talk about a little bit, and we're getting ready to scale up this year with choosing 2 divisions. And everywhere I go, everybody is like, hey, we want to transform, we want to move quicker. So the problem is not at the units. They recognize what we need to do, and they're very good at accepting this technology. I do think that we can, again, this gets to process change. It gets to us and what AFC, and I think General Rainey is going to be out here, is how we describe characteristics of need rather than these big, requirements documents, and we hand it over to the people that really understand, the engineers that are out there. Again, user with the developer that can do things quicker, and we have a lot of, industrial capacity that can do that. And I think 3D printing and 3D manufacturing and how we're simplifying these things, I do think we can go faster. A lot of our problem, again, is process of going all through all the steps that we have to do. How we line up R&D money is the same way, it goes from 6.1 to 6.2 and it goes down that. I mean, these are process changes, and if we're more agile in our funding, which is what we need to be, and you've heard me talk a lot about this, and we're buying capabilities rather than programs, I think that we can and have to move much faster.
I talked about being optimistic. Are you optimistic about some of these process changes actually coming to fruition in the coming years? The flexibility with funding being a perfect example.
Yeah.
It seems that Congress has an openness to perhaps either additional authorities or where authorities aren't even required, funding flexibility, perhaps in exchange for maybe more transparency or reporting. But is this an active conversation? Are you optimistic?
It's a very active conversation. I'm going to actually be on the Hill this afternoon for several hours, but I've gotten generally very positive feedback on what it is that we're trying to do. I think everybody understands that we have to make these changes and what we need to do to move quicker, and we have been talking specifically in those 3 portfolios. I think the challenge comes in, what we also need to do is stop buying the things that aren't war-winning. In my opinion, that's the hardest thing for everybody to come to grips with. Everything needs to adapt, and what we can't get, and I have a couple of systems that, that we stopped this last year, and there's, others that are in our Army that are not gonna make us more lethal, more mobile, better on the battlefield, and we can invest that in the things that we know are gonna make a difference. That's the harder part, it seems.
It is the harder part. At the risk of being a good idea fairy, like we used to say in the Pentagon, one of the conversations that I've had with General Rainey, as he thinks about this dynamic from the requirements perspective, is getting better insight into things that I was talking about not that long ago, such as what are capabilities that actually have overwhelmingly obsolete parts? What are capabilities where the threshold for requirement, the threshold for foreign reliance on foreign suppliers is higher than the risk level the Army wishes to accept? And are there ways to use data insights like that to help inform the divest to invest strategy?
I mean, you know that we have a lot of work to do in that, and we're very focused on that, I think, up and down. And again, this is something that, besides it'll make us more effective, we'll know ourselves better, and we're going to be much more efficient as well. And again, wherever you're more efficient, what you can do, and again, that's where it is usually the rub, because somewhere, it's tied to something that somebody's been doing for a long time, and you have to change the process. But that's what businesses are doing, and we have to take that approach to how we're doing things. So yes, I mean, especially, again, this gets back to, we have to let industry do what industry does best. We have to collapse all of the layers between, the people who really know what they're doing and the user who's trying to solve a problem on the ground.
Well, I think this is why the characteristics of need documents have been so powerful. And for those of you who aren't aware, this is a 2-page, in some instances, document that, and I should be letting you explain this, General George, but what we've seen is, this is the Army communicating to industry, here's what we need, not how to do it, in 55 pages.
Yeah.
And what is wonderful about this, especially to the tech sector, is that opens up a lot of room for innovation, because I can bring my ideas of how to solve the problem, instead of responding to an overly detailed RFP that actually squeezes out all the innovation, because now not only is that exactly what I have to do and how I have to do it, but that's exactly how all the competition is going to do it as well. So this is actually a great example.
Yeah, so what we're trying to do with that is basically, like you said, tell everybody the problem we're trying to solve. And oftentimes, and we did this with Next Generation C2, we said, here's the problem we're trying to solve, and actually we got back a better solution than if we would have put out spent a year putting together a 270-page document to go out there. We've got to stop thinking that and we do that because the system is trying to wean out any type of risk anywhere. And then we can put it out there, and we're going to have something for the next 30 or 40 years. We're very focused on buying things that are modular, open system architecture that we can, so I mentioned earlier on the drones, we're going to buy different drones. There are capabilities that we want for our formations, and people are coming out and seeing what we're actually doing in our formations. We had engineers out at this last Transforming in Contact, and they are talking to our soldiers, hey, this is a better way of doing it. And that's why we need those kind of people working together.
Great. Can I switch gears a little bit?
Sure.
So one of the questions that I've been asked, I think folks who are coming into the building now, into new jobs, are asking a lot of different people in the national security community is, what should we know? What should we know as we head in and try to drive change? And one of the points that I feel very strongly about is, I don't think that broadly the Army's role in the Pacific is well understood. And to put a finer point on it, I think the role is significant, and that aspect is underappreciated. Am I right in terms of the myth? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I agree with you 100%. I mean, I think first and foremost what we want to do is we're focused on deterrence. And I think that's what everybody wants us focused on. And you actually get that through strength and capability. The Army is going to enable every member of the Joint Force that's over there. Every port is on land, every airfield is on land that's out there in the Pacific. I think the Army is also going to provide an asymmetric advantage with long-range offensive and defensive fires that's going to enable the Joint Force that's over there. And the Army is extremely good at command and control, controlling large, complex operations at the joint level. And I guess the last thing I would say is we have a lot of relationships. Most of the the militaries that are in the Pacific are Army units that are armies that are over there, and having those relationships and being able to do those things with them, exercising with them, makes a big difference.
So Next Generation Command and Control is a perfect example of the importance in the Indo-PACOM AOR. And that obviously, as you mentioned earlier, is a priority program for the Army. So how are things going? How do you feel about progress?
Well, we're going to see it, out here, this in just a couple of weeks, and ready to get moving with that very quickly. And every unit that I go talk to wants this immediately. And, everybody can envision working off a tablet. Everybody can envision, again, that you wouldn't have big server stacks and, big satellite dishes that we're doing. And so the process of what we're doing, and I'm confident right now that technology exists and we can put this into units. And what we're going to have to do then is decide all the other things that are with it that we don't need. And it's going to make us better. We have seen over in units where, command and control nodes have gone from, 100 people to 20, and they're better. They can't be located on the battlefield. They're putting the signature off by more than a kilometer. So in my view, it can't happen soon enough.
Is this a priority more broadly within the Pentagon as well, or is everyone?
I think it has to be, and this is part of what we've been talking about with CJAD C2. I think how we're digitally connected and remain dispersed. And I hope this helps inform, and we're definitely working with OSD on this. But yes, I think everybody's interested in better command and control.
It's also a good example of another overall theme in these defense programs, which is software centricity. Is that something that the Army is grappling with, or has this been a gradual transition?
I think we have grappled with, software. I can give you a lot of examples of software programs that, my team has heard me complain about inside the Army. I think again, this is something that we have to go out to industry and, let them help us with this, and they can do that, very quickly. There's a lot of examples. I also think what's different about now, we have, with the software factory, there's other things that we can do that, can also enable our force. And if you look at Next Gen C2, a lot of these things that we've been doing that have been big, large, our AFATADs, which is our, targeting system, can now be on an app. And then, what do we do? What can soldiers do to produce apps that are making us better? So I think it's a combination of both.
Besides courage, what do you think is required to help leaders say, okay, that's it, this is the cutover. We're stopping the legacy way of doing things, or we're divesting of the legacy system because we've got to run some water through the pipes on the new modern program?
Yeah, I think we're ready to say that on a lot of things right now, on a whole bunch of things that we need to cut. And obviously there's a lot of people that have different views, on what that is. And what we're very focused on right now, again, and we've been having some discussions about this, is, we want, so we're looking forward. And none of this is without a little bit of risk when you're getting rid of some things and making sure you're investing in the stuff that's coming forward. But I think there's a lot of things that we are spending money on right now in the Army that we will not need down the road and that we need to get rid of. But again, there's a lot of people that are interested in that list.
Indeed. Are there specifics you're willing to put on the table?
Not probably this morning, but.
That's fair. That's fair. What about industry's role in all of this? You have mentioned a couple of times and alluded to the partnership. It has to be both. Are there things that industry should be doing more of, or you would like to see do differently?
Yeah, we're having a lot of conversations with industry, and I think industry, in my interactions, is as frustrated with process as we are. That they can change and they can do things. I've seen, other industries partnering together to make sure that we're, Next Gen C2 is a good example. There's a lot of examples out there. So I think that everybody needs to be, on board for process change and moving much more quickly. And, my message to everybody is, let's talk about this together. Let's come up on the road. And again, we can't be tied to how we were doing things in the past. We have to recognize that when you have something that you're making that is probably not something that's going to be successful on the battlefield, what are you doing to adapt? You should be building things that are going to work in our architecture, that's going to be modular, open system. And we're looking the same thing for vehicles. We know things like active protection are going to change rapidly. How do we adapt those systems and rather than having one big integrated system like we've done in the past that takes 5 or 7 years to produce, we're going to have to be more flexible as we move forward.
I mentioned at the start of this that I believe the Department of Defense needs to meet especially defense tech companies or companies that are newer to the defense space halfway in terms of flexibility. And to your point about open systems architecture, I actually think this is a perfect example of where that has happened, where when the earliest tech companies started coming to DoD, especially with software, it was a black box and everything was proprietary. And there were some fits and starts, some wins and failures in terms of the department being willing to try that approach and ending up with great success, but also ending up with failures. Today, what is possible, and what I believe the software industry in America has learned, is you can generate really powerful recurring revenue, which is the goal for our business models, without having to own everything.
Yep.
And what DoD has figured out is you need some fungibility among these systems. There are some core architecture pieces that I believe the Army should own, but you don't have to own every box. Is this an example of having that halfway?
I can give you several examples, but that's exactly what we're talking about. The approach that I think that we need to take, and just we look at how fast technology is changing. Something is going to be upgraded, the next year. I mean, we deal with this, and we're going to do this. We're going to transform at different levels. Your phone is a good example. Maybe not everybody needs the latest model. But some people might, and what are you going to do to, upgrade, certain tech that you have inside? But it's going to have to work on our network, for the Army. It's going to have to be modular, open system for us, and I think we can work all that out as we move forward. I mean, we're going to have to do that to maintain pace.
Coming back to your priority areas for modernization, can you talk a little bit more about why those are the right places to focus and where you see success so far?
Yeah, so you mentioned, what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. We're obviously, I do think we're moving towards uncrewed systems. What we're looking at for even how we would move things around the Pacific for watercraft and uncrewed systems, and I look at what the oil industry does, that they can do that. So a definite focus there that can add lethality. This last brigade that we had about 215 UAS, which was almost double what we did in the first one. I think we're moving towards, how do we have one operator with several systems that that's going to continue to expand. We are very focused on countering drones, and I think that's, both kinetic and non-kinetic. That's sensing and then deciding, and that's why the network is the centerpiece, for all of this for us. And then we're very focused on long-range fires, and again, how to do that. And there's companies out there that are after getting increased range in some of these missiles at a decreased cost. And again, we're looking at cost effectiveness as well. I try to tell everybody in the Army, we have our budget, and when you put it in the calculator, it's a really big number. You have to turn your phone sideways, and it still doesn't fit. And so, it's our obligation to try to get the best value for our money out of everything we're doing, and we're very focused, on that. We look at everything. What is the cost per kill? And what is it that we can do to make sure that we are wringing every bit of value out of these things? And I think industry understands that as well, and can come back. That also increases your magazine depth when you are able to do things and you're able to get costs down.
Which ties into the scale piece.
This ties into scale.
You talked about uncrewed systems and counter UAS, which certainly seem to be playing a larger and larger role in the fight. Some have said that while tragic, the opportunity to test some of these systems on the Ukraine battlefield has been valuable. From a test perspective, do you think that the Army has what it needs in order to experiment with some of these new capabilities, robotics, et cetera?
So what we're trying to do, and certainly, like out at the National Training Center where we have the capability to basically do everything that we need to do, owning the space. I just was out at Fort Riley, Kansas this past weekend, and we can do a lot of the same things. I think we have to, we are thinking about doing that. We were over in Germany. I think we're going to have to take a different approach at every one of our, where we're training, and that's what we're talking about. How do we have the ability to train these things and train them safely in what we're doing? So I do think we can replicate those conditions, and where we need to go to certain high-end places, like White Sands, or we're doing things with partnerships out with CENTCOM in Red Sands or those kinds of events, then we can do that. I mean, this is a cat and mouse game of advancement, and so we need, again, this is process. How do we do this at the pace we need to do it?
Sure. Touching on, again, the Ukraine theme, unbelievably, we just passed the 3-year anniversary of Russia's invasion. Given what's happening in the world, ongoing conflict in the Middle East, and though the pressures are changing in Europe and becoming more, I would say, multifaceted in addition to just the unbelievable longevity of that fight, is China still the greatest threat we face?
I think it definitely is the greatest threat, the most formidable adversary. And again, we're looking at our formations and transforming them, and the idea is that those formations, and we will, for example, drones that we're going to use with 11th Airborne up when it's, well below zero might be a little bit different. But, those units also, we would make sure that we have the equipment that they could go anywhere in the world, and that's how we're going to have to be, with the Army and what we're doing. We're down on the southern border right now. We're using that as an opportunity on the southern border to make sure there's a lot of things that we can do with tech, I think, that can enable us. They're doing that with the network that's down there to make sure that we're integrating all the sensors, what we can use for ISR assets and all that to assist the border patrol. So I think we just have to look for every opportunity that we have. I think we're trying to focus on opportunities and then, identify these challenges and try to bust through them.
One of the opportunities that was created in the past few years to bring more of these modern capabilities into the system, and to your point about making sure that we're getting soldier touch points on them, were things like Replicator. And I don't think any of us actually know what the future of a number of those initiatives are, so I won't ask you to weigh in on whether they will still be around. But as you look across DoD and see these opportunities, and specifically then within the Army, is there enough room for experimentation? Will there continue to be funding to place bets?
In my view, and we're doing, Project Convergence, which I would invite anybody out, to show what we're doing out there with that. What we're really trying to do is make sure that we are experimenting in our exercises, that we are experimenting in our units at the training centers, and I think that we can do more of that. And I think just like we had the unit over in Europe, they were already deployed over to Europe. And we can experiment with doing those kinds of things. So I think that helps with units. We have all these extra events because it's personal tempo as well that we're trying to save. The other advantage that you get, and what we've noticed, if you're in the Philippines, humidity is a problem. So we're learning from that when you do it, and that's the problem if you just go to a test center. We learned about icy fog in Germany. That has a different, impact on what we're doing. 120 degrees in the Middle East with, sandstorms presents different problems. So I think we're just going to have to be comfortable doing things, and again, with users and developers around the world.
Yeah. Your point about some of those specific lessons reminds me of an engagement we had with PEO Ground Combat Systems years ago. and they saw an earlier version of our ARC product, and they said, this is great, but you know what I really need to know? I really need to know how wide are the bridges in Europe, because I'm trying to figure out where we'll be able to actually maneuver. Well, fast forward to 2025, and in ARC today, you can see that, and you can watch the M1 tanks roll around Poland, and you'll be able to see them out at National Training Center and get the data off of them, but also, importantly, see data about the surrounding environment. And that's the kind of marrying up, I think, of DoD's own data coming from Army platforms, alongside this external data that, for a long time, DoD didn't sort of naturally adopt. Have you seen a real shift in how the Army thinks about data?
We're trying to use that, yes, and I think that I was just thinking about your point, what I just saw in Europe. What we're trying to do, if you get something in a unit and soldiers actually use it, how they're going to use it on the battlefield, we learn completely different things. And it was interesting having, the companies that were on the ground and our soldiers going, breaking it maybe,
Yes.
talking about what capabilities, that it needed to have, that it didn't have. And then what we're trying to do is put that right back in. We may adjust a requirement. We talked about this with the infantry squad vehicle, what changes we would need to make. And I just think that we have to, that's where the data and can streamline how we're doing that and make sure we're doing that quicker.
Great. Well, I could talk to you all day. I'd love to bend your ear on AI, but we don't have all day, so I'll ask one final question.
You can bend Rainey's ear. He'll be up here.
Deal. And I'll leave it broad, which is I asked you to weigh in on my optimistic point of view, but as you look ahead the rest of this year and next year, and that's it, just that timeline, because we spend a lot of time in DoD talking about 2030 and 2040. In the next 2 years, are you optimistic or are you worried?
I'm optimistic. I mean, I really think we're at a point that people understand that we need to change, and I think that there's a willingness to do things different. And we need to in getting after some of this process change. So I'm going to say glass half full right now with what we need to do. I think we all need to continue to press on this, and we're going to have some tough decisions to make, but we have to make them.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tara. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
It's fun.
Thanks.